Take a wild guess what Kanye is saying about slavery now. Welcome to this episode of Escaping the Echo Chamber. I'm your host, Aaron Comey. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And I have a poll up today about whether or not you would rather listen to 10 hours of Kanye's new album straight or 10 hours of Taylor Swift's new album straight. Let me know what you think. Kanye West recently did an interview with Big Boy about his new album, Jesus is King. How long do you think the interview stayed on topic? How long do you think it went off the rails? Let's find out.
Me being taken to my lowest, you know what I'm saying, being called a coon by my own people. The guy that said George Bush don't care about black people is a coon because I didn't say I'm gonna vote on Hillary Clinton.
That didn't take long at all. Clearly that's been bothering Kanye because he got right to it.
They were fighting for us to have the right to our opinion, not the right to vote for whoever the white liberals said black people are supposed to vote for.
And does it even make sense to be called a traitor to the black community because you didn't support some rich white woman against some rich white man? The same rich white woman that advocated for mass incarceration and called black young men super predators? Kanye has admitted that he's not that knowledgeable about politics, so he didn't get into the specifics about why defending Hillary is a ridiculous hill to die on. But he does touch on an important issue. That issue is allowing white liberals to define blackness. And actually the same thing would go for white conservatives, allowing white people to define what blackness is or isn't. And it's also similar to something point that Killer Mike made at the Revolt Summit.
What y'all are seeing right now are free people arguing over who got the best master.
It makes not a lick of sense to say someone is less black because they refuse to bow to this white person rather than that white person. As free men and women, we shouldn't be bowing down to any white person. As free men and women, we shouldn't be bowing down to any person at all.
Okay, so last year y'all tried to tell me who I'm supposed to vote for because I'm black. Now this year, white liberals trying to tell me who I'm supposed to vote for because I'm Christian.
An interesting point is I wish Kanye had asked which candidate is supporting Christian values. I wonder if James Corden, whom Kanye was referencing, would have been able to give him an answer or would have just said nobody and rather, Kanye support nobody rather than Trump. A question I've recently asked Trump supporters is how they feel about blasphemy. Because as someone who was raised Christian, I was infuriated when I heard Donald Trump refer to himself as the King of Israel and the second coming of God. And then later in that same day, he's looking up to the heavens talking about, I am the chosen one. I mean, even in the scriptures, angels were quick to just stop anybody and shut somebody down from worshiping them. And I expected a much louder response from the Christian community on that one. And I'm curious as to where Kanye falls in that issue.
We are cultureless. We don't have our own culture. We sign to culture vultures. We sign our life away. Our contracts are culture vultures. Think about everything that's cultural. Taking a knee is cultural. Being on social media is cultural. Wearing high fashion is cultural. Pushing a foreign is cultural. All these things are not owned by our culture. So who designed the culture? What does it mean to do it for the culture? That's why I do it for Christ.
This is hard for a lot of people within the black community to hear because when you've made so much progress, it's hard to hear how much further you still have to go. So while black people in America are in a vastly different situation than black people in America used to be. Kanye's point about ownership is an important one that shouldn't be overlooked, and I personally do not overlook.
And we are African Americans, and we are still dealing with modern day slavery. We still have record contracts, publishing deals, touring deals, management deals, radio deals, that we not the owners.
Did Kanye use the best analogy? Did he minimize the depths and extents and severity of slavery by comparing it to management deals and publishing deals and recording deals? Without a doubt. But he's not the first one to make that analogy. There's, in fact, I think there's even a book called The $40 Million Slave of talking about athletes. Regardless, it's a ridiculous analogy. Because for one thing, just one crucial difference between slaves and, our modern day athletes, our modern day artists, rappers or singers, is we're getting paid these days. These days we're actually getting paid. And in many cases, whether it's not the bulk of the money that's being generated, it's a lot of money that we're being paid. So there's just, it's a ridiculous comparison to make. And there's other words that could be used to indicate exploitation and being swindled. But we've got to stop with this habit of comparing today and things hardships we're experiencing today with slavery. There are better, more reasonable comparisons that could be made. Because one of the other points people are forgetting is artists, these recording artists, these athletes are entering into these deals voluntarily. So whether it's exploitation, whether it's being swindled, it's a far cry from slavery.
Exactly, 100%. I have turned my back on the idea of victimization mentality. We are locked up. We went from 1 and 4. We went from 1 and 4 to 1 and 3, but we always pointing at the white people, but yet we want to spend all of our money on foreigns. We want to spend all our money on luxury as opposed to going and buying some land. America is for sale. And there's a lot of barren land. Disney bought a lot of it in Florida. But the culture has you focused so much on fucking somebody bitch and pulling up in a foreign and rapping about things that could get you locked up and then saying you about prison reform.
There's a couple of points I want to get to before I get to the victimization part. Kanye and others have often made this point in talking about blackness or the culture. There is so much negativity and destructiveness that is framed as authentic expressions of blackness. But the most important question that's rarely asked is who's promoting this image of blackness or the culture. We'll return to that question later. I do take issue with Kanye's discussion of victimization because it seems to be directed only at black people on the left. If you take your favorite political pundit or politician, you'll find them exploiting the victim mentality. You've got your Bernies and AOCs talking about Jeff Bezos and Walmart and these CEOs, these corporations. But if you look on the right, you've got your Trumps, you've got your Tucker Carlsons talking about Jeff Bezos. They'll talk about Twitter and Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg. Then you've got Tucker and Trump pointing fingers at Mexicans and other immigrants. On the right, they play these games talking about immigrants coming and stealing people's jobs. They complain about losing jobs because corporations are going overseas and foreigners are taking their jobs that way. But if you're being replaced by somebody who doesn't speak English, who has little to no formal education, and who just got into this country 5 minutes ago, how useless are you? How easy is your job? Because if you can be so easily replaced, maybe you need more skills. How can people on the right have such direct, such blunt, and introspective advice for people who are making minimum wage in the inner cities, but be so oblivious when it comes to their own shortcomings? How can people on the right have such direct and unfiltered advice for people making minimum wage in the inner cities, but not have the same pull yourself up by your bootstrap kind of talk for middle America? Clearly, telling people they're useless doesn't go over well, and it's not likely to get them to actually stop and take a look at themselves. I like the way Will Smith put it in talking about fault versus responsibility. It's easy to blame others for our problems or look at external factors as reasons why we're not successful. But there's a question I had to ask myself when I was in a really bad situation which seemed insurmountable. It's a question that applies whether or not there is an outside force causing our problems or not. In fact, it applies more so if there is an actual outside force. I had to ask myself, how can I overcome these obstacles? How can I achieve my objectives in spite of this interference? So without pointing the finger at people making minimum wage in the inner city or people out of work in middle America as being failures and responsible for their own problems, we can frame it as saying we are responsible for our solutions. We are responsible for the solutions to these problems. The people in making minimum wage are responsible to make more money, to be able to provide better for themselves and their families. The people in middle America are responsible for finding some kind of jobs or some way of making money to provide for themselves and their families. It's simple. We are responsible for finding the solutions to our problems. We need to look at what we can do smarter, more efficiently, and differently to improve our lives. So even if we're not looking at ourselves as the blame, as the cause of these problems, we need to be looking at ourselves for the solutions. Because pundits, politicians, and power brokers, whether they're on the right or the left, want us to sit back and do nothing while they're making a killing. Now I wanted to get back to that question I had asked about who's responsible for these images. Because with this statement, what Kanye does is he strikes at the heart of something that is an affliction. I think one of the biggest afflictions facing the Black community. It's not just within the Black community, it's also without the Black community. Because these images of Black people are being spread across the planet so that people who may have never interacted with Black people are forming an opinion of Black people, of who Black people are, how Black people behave, how Black people think, based on these images, based on these depictions in media. This is what people are forming their opinions of Black people on, and are treating Black people accordingly based on these preconceived notions, which they don't think are preconceived because they didn't just come up with it. They saw it. They saw these images being brought to them. And they assumed if this is how Black people are being portrayed in the media, in TV, in videos, in movies, that this must be real. This is a reflection of what's really going on and how black people truly behave. The really insidious part is these images are also pushed to black people. And the problem is we sometimes start to buy into it, especially if you take a look at younger black people. Young people, period, want to fit in. So if they're watching these images on TV, on music videos, we're all impressionable, but the young people are even more so impressionable. They're thinking these are the things they have to do. This is the way they have to behave in order to fit in with everybody else. And the really insidious part is that we have allowed people that don't respect us, that don't know us, and that don't even like us to define us. And when young people are faced with these images, they try to emulate these self-destructive and negative behaviors and thought patterns because they're trying to fit in, and this is what they think they have to do to fit in. But what Kanye says really hits at the heart of this, because this is what happens when we don't own our own media and when we allow other people to define who we are and who we should be.
I can't tell y'all how to feel, but what I can tell you honestly is how I feel.
This is the sentence that I think clarified some of the critique I had of Kanye last year. His proclamations of being a free thinker, despite not describing an actual thought process that led him to support Donald Trump, is touched on right now and revealed to be what it was, a feeling. And I'm not saying this because I think there's no logical reason to like Trump. I'm saying this because when Kanye says, I'm a free thinker, everything he said after that, everything he described, everything he articulated after that point was an emotion. So I appreciate that he is now acknowledging that. He's accepted that, he's identified that, he's acknowledged that, and he's letting his fans and his supporters know that just because this is how I feel, you don't have to agree with me. It's fine. We can have different opinions. We can feel different ways about different things or different ways about the same things, and it's not an issue. And one of the key things that happened is that Kanye is aware even when we think he's in some kind of haze. Because Big Boy decides to posit his opinion that he disagrees with a lot of what Kanye says, and Kanye tells a story which is indirectly telling Big Boy, like, I didn't ask what you think. I didn't ask you to agree with me. I didn't ask if you agreed with me. I'm talking about me. I'm talking about what I feel. And he tells a story about his friend who just unsolicited says, yeah, I don't agree with you and everything. He says, I didn't ask you to agree with me. And he's not really saying that about that friend. Whether that conversation actually happened, I don't know. That could have just been Kanye's way of just telling him, I didn't ask what you thought, whether or not you agree with me. I don't care whether or not you agree with me. Whether or not you agree with me is irrelevant. Because that's a key point we have to have in not worrying about what other people think of what we're doing or what we think, what we believe. Of being willing to believe something, to do something, regardless of how other people feel about it. Thank you for checking out this episode of Escaping the Echo Chamber. As always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next episode.